Okay, Clare Flynn, your first novel, A Greater World. Perhaps you'd like to tell me a little bit about what inspired you to write it.
Gosh, it's a long time ago that I actually started to write it. It was shortly after my second, I think, trip to Australia, and I decided I was going to write a novel set in the Blue Mountains. I'd already been playing around with the character, which is the main protagonist of the book, Elizabeth Morton, and I then came upon a situation for her that would compel her to move from her hometown of just north of Liverpool over to Australia, and that was the springboard for the whole thing.
I suppose we ought to tell people, of course, that although you only visited Australia 10 years or so ago, the book itself is set in the 1920s, or at least starts in the 1920s.
Yes, it starts actually in 1920, so in the immediate aftermath of the First World War and all the implications that carries. And obviously the two main characters, Elizabeth and Michael Winterbourne, are both, or have both been affected one way or another by the terrible traumas that were the First World War.
And was there something in particular that drew you to that period in history rather than another? Was there something that excited you as a novelist about it?
No, I quite like the distance that a historical period gives me. I don't feel, although I may do in the future, I don't feel at the moment terribly inclined to write about the present day. I like the fact that history distances you and creates something you have to dig in and explore, and I also enjoy doing the research that's needed to basically to bring the period alive in the book.
We're going to take that again. I'm going to phrase the question slightly differently.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the book itself is set in the 1920s. Why did you choose an historic context as opposed to something you'd be more familiar with, more present day?
Because I find that period interesting. You know, I like the clothes. I like the things that went on. I've always been interested in the First World War, and somehow also the link between the period and the place that the book was set. It's in the Blue Mountains, loosely based on Katoomba, with a little bit of other places thrown in, and I was looking back to when that would have been much more. It's a bit run down and rather scruffy now, so actually taking it back to what it would have been like when the town was still relatively new and people were coming to it fresh. And also, the backdrop is the coal mining industry, and that's all dead up there now. So I wanted to be sure that I was at least in a period where mining was still going on.
And in terms of the title you've chosen for your book, A Greater World, how did you arrive at that?
I I was actually Googling Blue Mountains, I don't know, because I really was stuck. I couldn't think of a title at all. And I came across a poem. And the poem completely summed up for me the idea of the book. And the final lines of it is, "Beyond the Blue Mountains we'll find a greater world." And then I discovered that the poem had been put to music by Edward Elgar, who I really like, and who is also the archetypal English composer. And so the juxtaposition of the poem about Australia and the kind of classic Elgarian airs just seemed right to me. Also, Elizabeth, the main character, plays the violin, and I could imagine her playing Elgar, so the whole thing fitted together very nicely.
To me, the title A Greater World indicates an optimism. I know that the characters have extraordinary ups and downs throughout the book, but would you describe the book ultimately as one that's full of hope?
Yes, I would say so. There are ups and downs, and things don't work out perfectly for everybody, but it does have, I guess, it reaches a conclusion that I think you would describe as being hopeful, yes.